The dirt path had begun to smooth out into cobblestone road as we walked towards the city. Small huts and homesteads with fenced livestock and crops scattered around their properties rested outside of the city. A mixture of humans and elves resided in these homes. It seems they have allowed some men farmers to keep their lands even after their conquest of the city, and elven farmers to set up their own plots. I assume the menfolk were little more than slaves, though, kept to their own homes, forced to serve the elven barbarians. They would be free of such servitude soon. "Fulti, stop your shaking," Tarbrim demanded. Fulti responded with an ow as he was nudged by Tarbrim. "The elves will take you away for anything that they may deem suspicious. You would do well to remember that." Yes, I realize that, Tar. Just let me settle. I'm here to help, and you would do well to remember that." Tarbrim groaned, letting out a stream of smog which can be smelled, even from the front of the group. "Curse it, Tar," came Yern. "You mustn't forget your mint. It isn't just for your sake." Tarbrim puffs again as another cloud of fumes leaves his soot-ridden mouth. Yern handed him a mint, indicated by Tarbrim's response, which was, "Oh, how kind," before placing the mint leaf in his mouth. "And before I forget," Yern pulled from his pouch 8 pins with a stubby mule fashioned onto each of them. "King Torres had given these metal symbols to me to bestow upon all of us. They will identify us as traitors from the west," Yern said to us. "Haste be upon us! A patrolman approaches!" Bulin told us as we all shuffled to put the pins on our chest. The patrolman approached steadily, holding out its hands to stop us. Its padded mail coat had compensated for its stature, making it look stout and somewhat menacing to those who had shied away from armed conflicts. As we grew closer, we could see its face. The elf looked no older than a shepherd's boy. Its most notable feature was its ears. They were long and pointy. Surely the elf was its family's pride and joy, but they seemed to be getting burnt and flaky from being exposed to the sun. The creature glared at us as it approached. It held its pike out towards us, causing us to stop once we reached the pike's tip. It asked us to present our goods that we would be trading here in Sunraiser, in human tongue. It was fairly fluent, though failed in pronouncing words greater than one syllable correctly. We obliged the creature by pulling our sacks off of our backs to reveal a great deal of silver and gold plates. The elf grinned a stupid grin and reached his hand out to grab one from my sack. The gold plate he grabbed was bitten to make sure we didn't bring false currency. It didn't break. The elf twirled it between its hands and then gave us a look, then shifted its eyes back towards the city. The elf slid it into his pocket and withdrew his pike and waited for us to continue on towards Sunraiser. I made a motion of thanks before closing my sack and mounting it upon my back once more. So far, so good it seemed as we continued on towards the front gate. As we approached, I took note of the foliage that was decorated outside of the great city. The colors were lively on the flowers. Roses, daisies, and azaleas blended in well with the pale wall of Sunraiser. The multitude of colors almost like a portrait upon a blank canvas. Luckily, something a man's doing had stayed during our absence. I saw a hand reach out in front of my face and a snapping of fingers was made. It seemed as if my brother behind me was making an attempt to get me to focus as we came up to the entrance. A dozen guards stood in front of open iron gates, weapon and shield resting at their side. The guards at the gate were as tall as their own spears, wider than a sword's length, including its hilt, much larger than any regular elf. They had only pieces of armor, pauldrons, greaves, boots, and helmet, but they were of great quality. The rest of their body was covered in various blue and red battlecloths, allowing them mobility. They were in much better shape, both physique and equipment-wise, than the young patrol we had encountered earlier. They eyed us with careful expression as their superior approached from his station. The elf ordered us to lower our bags and our weapons. We did so as calmly as we could, though some of us withheld our daggers. It ordered its subordinates to grab the weapons we placed on the ground, which they did, and placed them inside of their station. It then looked through our bags and saw both pelts and gold we brought with us into the city. Afterward, it ordered us to carry on with our business, and that it could only be conducted with the merchants in the market, the shops, and the innkeepers. It also recommended that we visit the capital to pay our respects to Representative Saul of the Westmen, who upheld the alliance between the Westmen and the Elves. We had infiltrated the city, but our moment of glee was cut short as the guard captain shouted at us. I froze in my place, thinking we had been found out, that they may have recognized our appearances. We all turned to him as both his subordinates and himself approached us. He pulled Bolbir, Folti, Toldir, and Tarburm back out of the group. Folti was quaking in his boots as he was ordered to stand beside the guard. The two guards chuckled at the sight. It angered Bulin as he lowered his hand to the hilt of his knife, but Jörn grasped his shoulders and shook his head. He was calm once again, as he should have been. The elven captain explained that my 4 fellow traders were to shop on the other side of the city, and once business was concluded, we would be allowed to leave out of the city together. The captain assured us that we would be able to trade adequately under these conditions, and that we had no say in the matter. The guards marched my brothers off while we were left to go about our business once again. I kept a steady focus on the path they took, which way the guards were going, but my focus was cut short by one of my brothers tapping on my shoulders. "Do you suppose they have found us out?" Bulin asked me in a frustrated manner. "No, not at all, though this complicates things," I say in a hushed tone. "We'll reunite with our brothers in arms when the time is right, but for now, what do you think we should do next, Storn?" Jörn asked. I thought for a moment. "We should head for the marketplace, seeing as how we are traders after all. Best not give away our cover so soon," I answered. "Lead us there, then," my brother replied as we marched on towards the marketplace, which had signs pointing in its direction. I took note of my surroundings, looked for ways to flee in case we were found out. I assumed Jörn and Bulin did the same. I saw the houses of the elves, once homes for menfolk. They were made of wood and stone brick, the former being fashioned into beams and columns to make the frame, and the latter being used to make the house's foundation and its walls. The house's second floor, if it had one, would have had wood flooring. It seems they kept these homes in good shape, as they were spotless on the outside. I then took note of the alleys in between their houses. They were filled with various crates that stored trash, barrels with refuse, and other bins with waste in them. It seemed as if they had a problem with managing their trash here. This was surprising for me, as the elves were known for being cleanly. I then noticed further down the street men with horse-pulled carriages making stops just outside of the alleyways. As we came closer, we noticed them putting the waste containers that sat in the alleyways into the back of the carriage. The fellow who was putting a trash bin in the back of the carriage took a second to wave at us as we passed by. He looked strong, incapable, yet scarred from sword and flame. I then noticed something on his head. He had a captor mark in the shape of a square bin. This man was a warrior who had been taken as prisoner and left alive to live his life in servitude to the elves. Another large man appeared from the alleyway. He had a similar mark on his forehead as well. He barked at the man who was waving at us to help him move some barrels around, as it was too heavy for him. It seemed that they made the dishonored defenders of men take care of their filth here, toiling away with their waste, never being given a proper death in the field of battle. We offered their kind that much, but they would never extend the same kindness to us. Why wouldn't they? Had they lost their sense of honor over the centuries we have been fighting? Do they see us as a species lesser than they, deserving of enslavement? These passing thoughts had burdened my heart, but I had to simply tell myself that all would be well and that we must press on. I felt Jörn tapping on my shoulder. "Do not fret over them. They will be freed soon. You know this." "Do I seem concerned, brother? Our Father guides us even now in enemy land. He will preserve our lives," I responded. "You never seem concerned. You are always concerned. You cannot mask your kind yet troubled spirit. You should be comforting the youngers. I bring my concerns to the Father, brother. But remember that you may also confide in me. Brotherly love exists for such a purpose." "Thank you, but we must continue on," I said, stepping forth with a liveliness to my step. We walked some ways down the cobblestone street till we arrived at an interruption of noise and a boom of people. The street had been filled with stands, each having an assortment of goods and an elven shopkeep manning it. They either yelled at their own kin or some men who were here for trade to come and shop at their stand, that their brand was better than the one across from them. The merchants and citizens of the city would skip from one shop to the next as if they were a stone thrown across a pond. They were comparing prices, finding the best deal, and making a profit from their educated decisions and guesses. This was the marketplace. I spotted a group of menfolk huddled around one stand, yelling and pushing other men aside for no visible reason. I approached the group, tapping on one of the men's shoulders. This one didn't seem to be making an attempt to pierce through the crowd. He turned to me and let out a bellowing, "Yes?" "What is it that these men are crowding the stand for?" I asked. "They want the vendor's moon oil. It's the last in the marketplace." Moon oil? "Yes, the oil is an elven rarity, used for treating your soil so that it can absorb lunar magic, yada yada, which helps your plants grow twice, if not thrice as fast. But I'm just here to watch the fireworks." "It's a fool's idea to let fools act foolishly," Bulin let out. "Bulin, watch your—" I let out before the man pushed my shoulder. "You should keep a short leash on your youngling here. The elves don't deal kindly with those who speak ill of others." It cleared my throat as I held my arm out, towards Bulin, who was stepping forward, hand reaching for his dagger. "Yes, thank you, sir. But I must ask, where may we trade in our pelts?" The man pointed out a stand that was behind us and slightly to the right. The stand had a bored, elderly elf as well as a stack of arrows and quivers hanging up from hooks on the side of the stand. I nodded at the man and thanked him. "Pleasure," he responded as he turned back towards the chaos that was still ensuing at the stand. We started our walk towards the hunting merchant. "That was foolish, Bulin. You could have cost us our anonymity," Yurn said. "The man simply wants to see things go wrong. Men like him should be criticized for such disgraceful actions," Bulin refuted. "Do criticize when your criticisms won't bring about a disruption of the peace, Bulin groaned, but didn't have anything else to add. We approached the stand, the elderly elf, owner, awakening from his dazing. "Ah, menfolk! Finally! Been waiting for some real trade," it stated as it pulled out several special quivers from somewhere below and laid them out before us. Yurn and I reached over to grab the arrows from them. The one I had grabbed was made of steel. The broadhead variant was used specifically for war, as well as hunting. Bulin typically carried some on him, though these had a much stronger wood shaft attached to the arrowhead. I passed mine to him as I turned to look at Yurn. The ones he had grabbed were made of bronze, with a bodkin point, which had the same uses as the broadhead tip, but lacked the injuring power the broadhead had. Bronze arrows were antiques, symbolic of a bygone era. "I fancy something more practical, like the arrows my brother had grabbed. This is a mere relic," Yurn stated to the vendor. "Ah, but you see, these arrows are special. Urgress, the legendary enchanter, fixed them to pierce through stone and hard materials like it." "That is quite a claim. Most of the gilded works have been all but lost," Bulin stated. "Perhaps we should try them first to see if your claims hold true." "I think not. The regular arrows will do, kind sir," Yurn protested. Of course. Here, a bundle. That will be 8 bars, and I can throw the quiver in for a deer pelt." "That is a deal. Thank you, sir," Yurn said as he pulled 8 bars from my sack. Arif pulled a pelt from Bulin's sack and handed it to Yurn. He traded the items for the arrows and the quilt, which he handed to Bulin. We nodded at the elf and walked off as Bulin swung the quiver around his shoulder. We left the market down a back entrance where rows of residential buildings rested. "Tell your kinsman," it shouted to us as we left. "Sure will. We'll even make time to loot his shop once we finish up here," Bulin stated, followed by a laugh as he elbowed Arif. I saw Arif give a slight grin, but adjusted his demeanor after Yurn turned around to glare at the both of them. He stopped us all as we were leaving the market. I turned back to see him, an expression of disappointment upon his face. He was staring down at Bulin. "You remember the courtesies that our fathers set for the winds, correct?" "Well, yes, of course. Our rules have not fallen on deaf ears." "These are not rules. These are ways of life we must uphold for the decency to be restored to our forsaken enemies. Our courtesies extended to the elves. Our birth father thought otherwise, as did his father. You fail to understand that the elves were not known as foes to our birth father and his as they grew into their elder years. They thought of them as beasts from myth, and although we may see their savagery and treatment towards men as being akin to an animal, they are not entirely so. That shopkeeper had no such monster contained within himself." Bulin stood there silently and listened. "I remember what happened on those dark days. decades ago. The screaming, the blood. I remember what they did to us and our kin, especially to you. Yet you must contain those pains, the same as Storn, Aerith, and the rest of us, for the sake of our mission." Bulin contemplated these words. "And what we do here, we will do so with our courtesies in mind, which means you will not lay a finger on the shopkeeper. Remember the first courtesy. Respect your life and your enemies, for you are all creatures under the same sun." "Yes, brother. I apologize for my arrogance." "Cheer up, young one. No matter what the elves have done, we will fix such," Yurn said, turning towards I. I reflected on his words for a moment, as I turned back onto the path, as did they. I only wish I had reminded the rest of our brothers of that before we departed.